Hello and welcome to the Spiritual Sexual Shamanic Podcast. This is your host, Usha Rose, and I am excited to be speaking with Kamela Love today. Welcome, Kamela.
Thank you, Usha. So good to be with you.
Yay, thanks for being here.
Mm.
So Kamela and I met in person actually a few years ago. I think it was 2021, I guess it was, in a level 3 training, ISTA training. Where were we? Arizona. Yeah, and we had just like a really great connection and a lot of fun together and some sweet shared experiences. And ISTA, um, Kamela has been continued to be involved in ISTA in some pretty valuable ways. And Kamela, I would just love for you to share a little bit about your path with ISTA, and you've been supporting us recently in some really, yeah, some significant ways. So will you just share a little bit about that so our listeners know what you're up to?
Yeah, so my ISTA journey began in 2017. That's when I did my first level 1 training and proceeded to continue taking trainings, did levels 1 and 2, and met you in 3, did the practitioner training over in Israel. So I really loved the material, loved the community, felt like a really good match for me, bringing my previous a lot of work with spirituality and previously a lot of work with sex positivity, but they were very separate communities for me until ISTA. So that was a really cool merging of two different worlds that I'd had into one, and it felt it really felt nourishing and really met me. And then my journey with ISTA shifted about 2 years ago. I was brought on to a team of mediators with a company called Safe Mediation. And so I was one of the mediators in Safe Mediation supporting ISTA, hired by ISTA to help ISTA with conflicts that were emerging in the field, globally speaking. So I did a lot of good work in mediation, specifically on a team with the other mediators in Safe Mediation, which is a company based out of the Netherlands, with a mediator who lives in the Netherlands, who's a Brazilian woman named Anaísa, living outside of Amsterdam, who founded the company, and a woman in DC named Denise, who is a fabulous mediator in training and mediation coordinator. And then I was hired onto the team as the third person, and I had already previously been working as a mediator for at least 10 years professionally. So we coined ourselves Tantra positive mediators because all of us had been through Tantra trainings, and we were a really good fit for the kinds of things that were emerging in the ISTA field, needing some support with repair and resolution. So I did that for about 2 years. And then in February of this year, February of 2024, I shifted off of the team of mediators with Safe Mediation into a role that we're calling the point person of the accountability process. So as of February, I've been the point person for ISTA's accountability process, which is a global process that was initiated about 2 years ago, same time that I joined the mediation team, because it was related. The mediators were used within that accountability process from the beginning. The original accountability process was launched by Kamala Devi McClure, who's one of our lead faculty in ISTA, and they knew that they were going to initiate it, and they had the passion to get it off the ground, and they knew that at some point they were going to get out of the role of really being at the helm of the ship. So I was the person who came in to ultimately step into more or less the role that Kamala Devi held. And I've been operating as point person for the last 4 or so months and working closely with Safe Mediation team as partners, as part of the external consultants that have been hired to support the accountability process.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you for doing that. I know Kamala Devi had been working a lot in that realm, and we really were needing someone who was capable and experienced and available to take on that role. So I'm super appreciative that you felt the calling to do that.
Thank you. You're welcome. It has been a really beautiful match for me in my calling, in the world as our soul guides us into our soul's journey deeper and deeper. I've been doing in my life a lot of restorative justice work and work to support the marginalized people to have a bigger voice and to support conflicts to transform into love. My business is literally called Transform into Love. So I've really been in the commitment as far as passion work to help people navigate conflicts and come to harmony. And I really consider that literally my soul's calling. So it's been truly a pleasure to be able to serve the ISTA field and really the global spirituality field and sexuality field, right? ISTA touches
Yeah.
those in such big ways, and it's truly an honor to serve.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And on that subject, I want to share with our listeners a little bit more background about you outside of the ISTA field. And you already mentioned Transform into Love as your business that you founded. And additionally, you're the founder of Integrate Legacy Dispute Resolution. You're a co-founder of Queer Tantric Arts, a transformational relationship coach, an integrative mediator, a facilitator of conscious play parties and sex positive experiences, and a former practicing lawyer.
Yes.
And I'll say a little bit more. Kamela blends her training in mystical Sufism, neuroscience, EFT, transmutation of trauma, energy sex and energy healing, transformational coaching, neo-tantra, shamanism, Cherokee Native American practices, NVC, heart-centered conflict resolution, restorative justice, and law to offer holistic perspectives on spiritual ascension and sexual liberation. Yeah, what a beautiful blend of so many powerful modalities. Um, yeah, super rich. And I want to just share this one piece because I absolutely love the way you've written this. Kamela's highest soul calling involves awakening humanity into a quantum up-leveling of societal justice and cultural harmony in such a way that we experience a lived reality of the presence of divine love in every facet of our lives. I love it. I love that specifically this, like, having the experience of experiencing divine love as in every facets of our lives. It's something that really resonates with me. And yeah, I'm like, yes, like what is all of any of this for, right? It's for us to like experience ourselves as the divine, as embodiments of love. And yeah, I get like chills when I really feel into the meaning and the truth of that purpose here on this planet.
Mm. Thank you for resonating so deeply with that. I really consider that nugget the heart of mystical traditions, and I think it is common across mystical faiths. And the way Sufis would describe the creation, the original creation story, which does come out of the Quran, so Muslims would agree with this, is that the divine was a hidden treasure that desired to be known.
Mm.
So she created all of creation to know herself through the interactions with each other. And so for my whole life, I was born into the Sufi mystical faith perspective and way of looking at the world. So for my whole life, it's been how do I know myself more and more deeply as a divine emanation, and how do I know others more and more deeply as mirrors of divine presence in my life. And it's not an easy walking. It takes everything we have, and I have by no means mastered it. It is still an ongoing daily process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to use that as a segue into our topic of conversation today, which is around accountability. And I think this is one of those places that can feel, sometimes it can feel so sticky and so heavy, like the word accountable, the word responsibility, and that brings us to like, oh, when there's been harm done, and it's like, oh, wow, it's in those dense, sticky, seemingly uncomfortable places where there's so much growth and opportunity for learning and forgiveness. And it's like that's where like I'll say, what is it? The rubber hits the road of
Yeah.
all of this, like talk about being aligned with divine love. It's like, oh, it's in those really hard places that is where we get challenged to show up for each other and call each other in and hold each other accountable and show up for ourselves and take accountability. So
Yeah.
yeah, sounds like a good segue.
Well said. And they're also the areas where we get the biggest bang for our buck. They're the areas where we get the biggest growth, where we get the biggest reward. And that is, for me, one of the reasons that accountability work is so important is because it is
Mm,
through doing accountability work that we become ethical leaders, that we become the kind of leaders people down power want to look up to.
mhm. Yeah, awesome. All right, so let's dive right into this. And we are going to be speaking a lot specifically towards, people in position of power, leaders, teachers, facilitators, and how they can be more aware of being accountable. But before we even get there, I want to like back us up to what does accountability even mean? And what do we mean by when we say like, oh, being held accountable or taking accountability? And also, I mentioned the word responsibility earlier, and what's the difference between accountability and responsibility. So if you'll just start us in, give us an on-ramp to this conversation.
Yeah. So responsibility versus accountability is a good distinction. It's a great place to start. So I look, and there's many working definitions out there. So this is one frame that I like that I'll offer today. Think of responsibility as taking ownership over actions, over the things we do. So if I'm a camp counselor for teens, I have a responsibility to take roll and make sure they're all in bed at night and put the trash away in the bear proof locked bin, right? That's me being responsible as a camp counselor. I'm doing the actions that are expected of me. Taking accountability goes beyond that. Taking accountability is taking ownership for the results.
Mm,
So let's say I'm the camp counselor. I do what I'm supposed to do. I take roll. Everyone's in bed at night. I lock the trash in the bear safe bin. But that night, one of the teens sneaks out of bed and goes to a fast food restaurant and gets some food and puts it in the trash, but doesn't lock the bear safe bin. A bear comes and rummages through the whole trash and it's spewed all over the campgrounds the next morning. And let's say my supervisor comes to me and says, Kamela, it was your job to make sure kids didn't leave. A kid left in the middle of the night. It was your job to make sure the trash was locked and the bear trashed the grounds. If I was only taking responsibility, I'd say I did what I was supposed to do. I did roll call. I locked that bin. I don't know how the team got out. I don't know how the trash got out, but it's not my fault.
mhm,
Right? So like I can be responsible by doing my duties, but I won't take accountability for the results. Whereas if I'm accountable, if I'm a camp counselor who's going beyond responsibility and into the realm of accountability, I'd say, look, I did what I was supposed to do. I did roll call. I locked the bin, but somehow things happened. Things went awry. And I'm going to step in and take ownership of this situation. How do we make it better? Which gets into the repair conversation. And how do we minimize the possibility of this happening in the future? Which to me is like the gold star accountability. So,
mhm,
accountability
mhm.
is taking responsibility for the results, particularly when they're unintended. And that's usually the stickier things for leaders is something happened and we didn't mean it to. So taking
Right.
accountability is taking accountability for what happened even when we didn't mean it to, and especially when we didn't mean it to. And then the gold star accountability is like, okay, I'm not only taking responsibility for last night with the bear and the teen escaping, but I'm also looking at how do we adjust our systems so this doesn't happen in the future.
Mhm. Yeah. Awesome. That's a really helpful explanation. Yeah. And I can see where it gets really tricky and you're like using the example you gave where the camp counselor is like, like this body language of like hands up, like I didn't do anything wrong. I did what I was supposed to do. Right. So like what would motivate someone to make that shift to being accountable? And what are some reasons like why is it sometimes hard to take accountability?
Yeah, I'm gonna give an answer that has to do with societal norms and sort of like the soup we're swimming in, right? What we grew up in as far as, and I'm speaking as an American, I'll say that. I know that we have global listeners and accountability is contextually different culturally. So I do want to say that how I'm speaking comes from a person who passes as white, who grew up in America. I'm definitely a part of different marginalized communities as a woman, as a queer woman, as a Jew by blood, as a Muslim by choice. So I've had my share of different marginalized communities, but I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the lens of a person who passes as white with an American upbringing. And the accountability that I'm into is really informed by restorative justice and transformative justice. So those lenses are also present in my speaking. So why do people not want to take accountability? And I'm saying, in a bit more of a Western world. And that's because in the Western world, we've come up with accountability as akin to a punishment. And we're
Mm.
dealing with this all over the place right now as we're looking at how we can have leaders take accountability, and people don't want to take accountability and they're shying away from it. And if we unpack that more, it's because accountability has been used as a punishment, as a reprimanding. You did something bad, so this kind of black white right wrong ethos. You've done something bad and now you have to take accountability. I'm sure you've heard those words.
Hmm.
Whereas the perspective that I'm unpacking and offering for us today, and the perspective that we're coming from in ISTA's global accountability process, is really attempting to totally turn that upside down and inside out and say, look, taking accountability is actually an honor and a privilege to be called into account. If I'm calling you to account, I'm saying I care about you. I care about what happened. I care about the people that are harmed. I care about you learning and growing and seeing the impact that I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not seeing it. But not because you don't want to and because you can't, just because there's blind spots and there's privileges operating, particularly in positions of power. So if I'm calling you to account, it's really like a vulnerable act, and it's a loving act where I'm saying let's look at this together and let's up level together. And I think we've
Mm.
lost that societally, and the whole criminal justice system is based on right, wrong, and punishment. And unfortunately, people see accountability as part of that. So we're working to offer an alternative way of seeing this and working through this.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's helpful. Um, Something I want to ask about is, we're going to be focusing a bit on leaders, but I'm curious if you can just touch on, where does accountability show up in day-to-day life, like in relationships and family dynamics with colleagues, where there may or may not be that power differential, and if you would use a similar kind of language, or is being accountable really just for like when there's power dynamics?
Great. I think accountability is everywhere in relationships between people. And I actually think power dynamics are also everywhere in relationships between people.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with these things that are always operating in the background and in the foreground, and often we're unaware of them. Just like in race conversations, those with privilege are the ones that don't see it. It's the same with power. Those with power
Mm.
don't see how and when they have power and how that impacts the relationship. So accountability for, let's say, people that are in more of a power equal place. If we can try to minimize power differentials, and let's say we'll use housemates as an example. So we've got adults living in a house together, and they've got some house agreements, right? Around cleaning the house and around having guests over and things like that. And often housemates are dealing with, well, what do we do when someone's not living up to the agreements, right? And we've all been there, where there's the person who's not doing their chores, or the person who's having their boyfriend or girlfriend over every night instead of only one night a week like the house agreed. And
Hmm.
so holding each other to account when it's more of a equal power relationship is equally important, in the sense that the health of the relationship really depends on it. And I think our general population has very little skills in, let's just start with communication skills, right? Like communication skills are really the platform for all of this accountability work and taking responsibility and taking accountability. We can't do it if we're not able to communicate in a mature way around what we're feeling and what we're needing and what we're asking of the other person, making requests, being able to sort of make a counter offer if you're not a yes to what that original request was, negotiating. So there's a lot of communication skills, which isn't the point of this podcast, but I just wanted to name it, that like all that's really needed as a platform to be able to even enter into successful conversations around taking accountability when we're in roughly the same power status.
Mm-hmm.
So if, let's assume these roommates have decent communication skills, then we're talking about a, a repair process so that people can continue to live in a way that feels good, in a way that feels harmonious. So taking accountability is often when something has gone awry, and it could be in the sense, in the example I gave, an agreement broken, like roommate agreements broken. That's a common place where people are asked to take accountability, or in partnership, like you said, where Usha and I are in the poly world, which involves a lot of communication and often a lot of relationship agreements. And often for people that are operating in a mature way in the poly world, I think most of us know, like, hey, look, agreements are going to be broken. It's not that we're going to live like we have to never break agreements, and if you break an agreement, you're dead to me, right? It's more like probably agreements are going to get broken at some point. So we want to have facility with the skills that it takes to navigate a broken agreement, which involves this accountability conversation. Hey, you broke an agreement. I don't punish you. I don't hate you. I still love you. I still want to be with you. And this thing happened, and we need to address it, and we need to look at it. And I'm asking you to take accountability, which, if we go back to the definition I offered, is for that person to take ownership over the results, to take ownership out of what actually happened, which is often not the intention they meant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So accountability is everywhere in all relationships. I think often when a call for accountability would be a good idea, it often doesn't happen. What I see more often in the roommates and in the relationships is people just honestly cut each other out of each other's lives.
Mm.
There's a, you hurt me, you fucked up, there's that punishment, you broke an agreement, you're bad, and you're dead to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, that's the most common response I see among people that don't have a great deal of communication skills and, spiritual walking under their belt.
Yeah, or there just becomes like a lack of communication and underlying tension and passive aggressiveness and avoidance, and things just get really icky and uncomfortable without being really directly addressed and resolved.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Thanks for kind of visiting that place that accountability shows up in our day-to-day lives. And yeah, I'd love to kind of start exploring, when there is those power dynamics, what is the responsibility of the person in position of power when it comes to accountability? And like how do leaders be more aware? Like say there's probably a lot of coaches, facilitators, teachers, leaders of some capacity or another listening to this podcast right now. So what would they need to know about accountability and how to become more accountable?
Yeah, there's a lot in those questions. So let's start with um, a little bit more around what it takes as a background, almost as prerequisites, before a leader could even be able to take accountability.
Right.
And I bring this in because it's something that people wouldn't necessarily think about or look at. So we
Perfect.
have a leader who has harmed someone, and the person they've harmed is down power to them, which is more often than not, right? When there's leaders, and I'll specify, we're going to talk about power in the specific realm of role power right now. So role power being, there's a teacher, a facilitator, a coach, the role they have by having that role confers power on them. So
Hmm.
for the most part, we're talking about role power right now, and there's many other kinds of power, and Shout out to the Right Use of Power Institute, because a lot of the people in my field right now are taking trainings with Rupi, and it's really, really, really helping us understand power dynamics and how they affect things like accountability and conflict resolution. So, highly recommend
Yeah.
that to try.
Yeah. And I just want to also specify the terminology. The up power position would be the teacher, the facilitator. The down power position would be the student or the one being coached,
Yeah,
just so that's clear with the languaging.
thank you. So, some things that the up power person, the teacher, the coach, the facilitator, would need to have under their belt before they can even effectively be brought to account or be enter into a conversation around community accountability. One thing we talked about is communication skills, so I'll leave that at that. Another thing is doing our own trauma healing work. We all went through stuff in our life that would be called trauma. And those things from our past surface into our present if we haven't dealt with them well. And if we haven't dealt with our own trauma, and some student or workshop participant of ours is bringing something to our attention that reminds us of our trauma in one way or another, if that gets in the way, we're not able to serve this person who is bringing something to our attention, because we're in our own trigger trauma realm. So doing our own trauma healing work, incredibly important.
And often I feel like that shows up in an unconscious way. Like the leader may not have any idea that that's playing out.
Yeah, that's really important to name. Often we don't, right? Because
Yeah.
this is part of our shadow work. So we could
Yeah.
attach to trauma healing work doing our shadow work, really doing our best to excavate our blind spots, which often comes through somebody reflecting it to us and somebody mirroring it to us. So having the willingness to look inside when we're receiving a reflection, and looking at our gunk and junk and skeletons in our closet, so that we're a clearer space as a teacher and as a facilitator, so that when somebody's bringing something to our attention, we can hear it and actually understand their perspective. And
Hmm.
too often what we see is the leader person is defensive and or gaslighting when a person down power brings something to that teacher's attention. That's a big, big thing across all the accountability processes I've worked on and have heard of from colleagues of mine. This is a huge, huge, huge factor. So, as teachers and as facilitators, we need to really do work on ourselves to get to the point where when someone's bringing something to our attention, we can listen from a non defensive place. And gaslighting being telling someone that basically their experience isn't valid or what they're saying isn't valid, and kind of using power over. Gaslighting is really using power over to diminish someone's experience or perspective.
Hmm.
So that's some of the common stuff that's happening when people are originally brought into accountability processes. It's because the original interactions where a person was harmed, when they're bringing the interaction to a teacher, to a person in power, that person's being defensive and or gaslighting. And so that's actually exacerbating the harm caused.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of my biggest coaching for people in power is get yourself to the place where you can really listen to feedback non-defensively.
Yeah.
Because if that person who was harmed by me, if they have the courage to bring it to my attention, which is a whole nother thing, that's a big deal. If they have the courage and the commitment to bring it to my attention, then it is ultra, 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 ultra important that I can meet them with understanding and with empathy. And my
Hmm.
belief is nine issues out of 10 will be able to resolve in a way pretty close to that interaction of the person who was harmed being met with deep empathy and deep understanding and deep validation of their experience, which is
Yeah.
the opposite of gaslighting. Like, if we can do that as teachers, we're going to dramatically minimize the issues escalating and becoming things that require mediation and accountability processes.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm seeing how much that applies even in like like lover partnership relationships, or like the example you use of housemates. It's like whenever somebody is bringing something forward, if it can be met with like, oh, I hear you, and let me see if I understand you, and okay, I understand that that was your experience, and having some empathy, like I think a lot of the times that's a big chunk of what's really needed and can support, like, is like the biggest factor in supporting resolution.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. And I wish it was easier actually to get to that place. Like, I want to give credit to how hard it is,
Mm,
the work to get to the place where we can really take in feedback non-defensively and without gaslighting. Because,
yeah.
I mean, we're talking high level global teachers that have been well known in their communities for decades are not able to listen to someone's feedback and really validate it and give them empathy.
Yeah.
So this is a grossly overlooked area that would make such a big change in community dynamics. I mean, we're real every single community has power dynamics happening, has leaders happening, every single community. From, something organized like a university, or a business to something more like social and dynamic like an ISTA community, right? Everywhere
Hmm.
down to the nuclear family, the four or five or six or three people living in a home.
Right.
Every level of community has power dynamics and leadership and this I'll call it a systemic issue where the people in power are using their power in a top-down way that smothers the voices of the people down power. And when the down power people are actually able to bring their voices, those voices are often shut down rather than really
Hmm.
validated and brought forward.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that piece. So, yeah, are there more things you want to add to this? Like what you said was prerequisites for leaders or anybody really to be able to be accountable.
Yeah. I'll name another big one is the ability to regulate our nervous system as leaders. So let's say we've done a lot of trauma healing. Let's say I dealt with all the major abuses I'm aware of in my childhood, and yay, good job, I did that work. Well, we're still humans that get triggered and emotional like all the time, right?
Hmm.
And what is our mastery and facility over working with our emotions and working with our nervous system? So if I have really good tool, which I do, and Usha does, like we've been developing these things for years. So when I feel that, pulse, my heartbeat racing, heat flushing, because something's happening
Hmm.
in a community setting, let's say where I'm being called to account,
Hmm.
my initial instinct might be something in the fight, flight, freeze, realm. If I can notice that and do, like, I'm an EFT, emotional freedom technique tapping practitioner, so that's one I'm going to go to often for myself. I'm just going to start tapping and breathing. I mean, breath is the simplest of them all, and we can regulate our nervous system really effectively with long, slow, deep breaths that is
Yeah.
accessible to everyone and takes no training. It just takes practice. So, how quick can we remind ourselves to take a long, slow, deep breath? And that'll bring me the neurobiology of it is interesting. When we're in fight, flight, freeze, we're in, as most of us know probably, we're in the amygdala part of our brain, which does not allow us to access problem solving or good communication skills. That's the part that
Hmm.
people might not know. What happens when we're in the amygdala is we're bent on survival and only survival, so we're not actually ready or able to have an intelligent, balanced, emotionally regulated conversation.
Yeah.
So why I'm saying nervous system regulation is so important is we have to be able to get ourselves into a regulated place in our nervous system before we can listen to someone else's experience, before we can provide empathy for them and validate their experience. And we
Mm.
also have to be in a nervous system regulated place to engage in problem solving, which is the heart of all of this conflict resolution work, is saying, okay, harm was caused, how do we deal with that? How do we come up with solutions that are really going to make everyone invested in the situation feel whole and feel heard? So if we can't regulate our nervous system, we can't do any of this work. We're only in survival mode, which is completely ineffective in the relationship repair mode.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Super good keys there for how to be able to be accountable.
Yeah, and I think your question was probably like three parts. So I want to go back to one of the parts of your question before that was important around the responsibility that the up power person has.
Mm,
What level?
yeah. Okay. Awesome.
And this is from Rupi, right? Use of Power Institute, so I'll give credit there. The model looks at a person with a higher role power and a person with a lower role power, and the question is, who's responsible for the health of the relationship?
Yeah.
And so, a beautiful baseline might be both people are 100% responsible. And that to me works well when we're talking the relationships that are less of a power differential, like the roommates and the partners in
Right.
a romance. If they are in fact less power differentials, because there can be roommate relationships and romantic relationships that have massive power differentials. So we're just pretending here. But once we get into the conversation of a big power differential with role power, then the teaching is, and this is what I've taken on in my life and how I work with the ISTA accountability process, is that the person up power holds 150% responsibility for the health and well-being of the relationship. And the person down power continues to hold 100% responsibility. Okay, so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
obviously the math doesn't add up. Like, what does that mean? What it means is the person who has higher role power is more responsible for the health and well-being of the relationship. That teaching is one that I think most leaders don't yet get and don't yet take on in their leadership role. So this is also a major, major game changer for the world. Once leaders start understanding that we are more responsible for the health and well-being of the relationship. And just quickly, why is that? Because when we take on a higher role power, we're part of that is we're taking responsibility. We're taking higher responsibility by being a politician. I mean, that's a bad example because there's so much. Many of them are bad examples because of how corrupt power is. I was going to say being a police officer or being a school teacher. It's like any of these role powers, like inherent in that is responsibility for the well-being of the people around us.
Yeah.
So when we take a higher level of responsibility for that relationship with someone down power to us, we're actually acknowledging that they're more vulnerable. So inherent in being up power is more responsibility, and inherent in being down power is more vulnerability. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's overlooked often when there's, someone in a workshop who has something happen. The teacher isn't realizing that they have a higher level of responsibility for the health and well-being of every participant. And when something goes wrong, or maybe they do, I think they actually do intellectually, like as a teacher, they understand I have a responsibility for the health and well-being of the participants in my workshop. I think they do get that. But where it
Yeah.
breaks down is when something goes awry.
Right.
Someone's hurt and harmed, and they name it. They're ready to use their voice and name it. That's when the teacher wants to say, well, I did the things I was supposed to do. We set up good boundaries in the workshop. We set up good consent practices. You are responsible for your own safety. We set up a safe environment. So
Mm-hmm.
see how the teacher is gaslighting, telling the down power person they're actually responsible for their own safety, which on a level is true, and we can hold that as true. And at the same time, I'll just invoke polytruths. There's multiple truths operating. At the same time, that person in the workshop is more vulnerable because they're opening themselves to these, healing experiences or transformational experiences or shamanic experiences or sexual experiences, depending on the workshop. They're more vulnerable. They're opening themselves to literally be sharing and showing vulnerabilities in their healing and growth process. So that's when the teacher needs to be extra, 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 extra responsible for the health and well being of the participants in the workshop.
Yeah.
And, yeah, like deep breath. I mean, Usha and I are both facilitators. We hold these spaces. And I'm not kidding. The more I get into the accountability work and the conflict resolution work, the more I am trepidatious as a leader. And the more I realize just how risky this work is as leaders. And actually this bridges well into part of the question you asked before too, which is, why don't leaders want to take accountability? Part of why we shy away from it is because we're scared of just admitting that we didn't do great or that we fucked up or that we caused harm. I think there's too much of our, perfectionism operating and fear of looking bad in front of others and thinking that we need to have it all together as leaders and we need to know all the answers. And honestly, the truth is we're gonna mess up. Just like in person who's been navigating poly relationships and dynamics for many years probably understands like at some point or not or another relationship agreements are going to be broken and we want to have the skills to work through those broken agreements. I think it's the
Yeah.
same as leaders. It's like despite our best intentions and our best preparation and our best training, we're gonna usually inadvertently hurt people at some
Yeah.
point or another when we're in our leadership role. And
Yeah.
normalize that a little bit, then it helps us navigate the space of, oops, I messed up. And, as colleagues with each other, can we support each other through that? Like, it's okay, I messed up once too, or I messed up 25 times.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people are scared of being wrong and being bad and messing up and not knowing everything. And the truth is it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen more than once. And
Yeah.
we hold ourselves gently in that. And can we hold each other gently in that?
Yeah. Yeah, something that's the word that's coming to me right now is, having humility, being humble, and even like getting more and more resilient and comfortable with the discomfort of unintentionally causing harm and being like, oh, I didn't get it right. And how quickly can I just get comfortable with that and move into like, okay, like what is needed now? What's the next step? And I think there's something to both parties, the one like the intent versus impact conversation, where it's like, I didn't mean to cause you harm and I did. So what do we need to do to get right with each other? And also the other person recognizing that, yeah, you didn't mean to, but you did. And I need something to get right with you around this. And can both parties have compassion and understanding to find resolution and what I call like, getting right with each other or like healing rupture or at least getting to a place of understanding as much as is available.
Yeah, you said that really well, really, really well.
Mm. Mm.
That's what's happening everywhere. Whether, regardless of the power differentials conversation, there is this impact versus intent conversation happening I think really in every harm cause. Well,
Yeah.
okay, there are the people who are intentionally causing harm. Sure. I don't think those are the coaches and the facilitators and the therapists and the teachers for the most part, right? Like
Right.
we're not. That's not what I'm dealing with in my work life, in my professional life. The cases coming to me are not, you know, Hitler's doing harm intentionally. It's good people with good training and good backgrounds doing their best to create healing transformational environments and
Yeah.
inadvertently causing harm. I think that's the bulk of the stuff that we're working on. And it's the harder stuff to work on, right? Because what you said so elegantly, even if I didn't mean to cause you harm, I did. And I see that because you're telling me that. And I validate your experience. And what can we do from here now that harm has been caused? That's
Mm.
exactly what we want leaders to say. And unfortunately, most of them aren't coming out the gate with that. They're coming out the gate with, I didn't mean to cause you harm. Why are you harm? Like something is off over there. Like you shouldn't be feeling harm right now. We set up all the parameters right. You gave me consent. I checked in 25 times. And yet harm was caused. And these are
Yeah.
the nuanced conversations we're having in ISTA. Harm's caused when there is consent,
Yeah.
right? It's not really a consent conversation. It's beyond consent. It's more of, you know, once harm is caused, and and I'm going to highlight a specific step for the person who's being called into account. It's often that step of acknowledging that harm was caused and validating that harm was caused is a really hard step for a lot of people
Mm.
because they're intent on, I didn't mean to, and look, I did all these things right, and why are you harmed? Like you shouldn't be harmed. It's because of your past trauma that you're harmed. It's because of whatever, your relationship with your mom that you're feeling harm. You know, it's anything other than the fact that my actions led to your harm, and I've got to face that. The
Mm-hmm.
person's telling me they're harmed. That is a subjective experience.
Mm.
But we think the leaders think it's somehow some objective experience and they shouldn't objectively be feeling harm. It's like, no, they're feeling harm. So are you willing to actually look them in the face and listen to how your actions left them in a state of feeling harm?
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, use the nuances and this whole awareness that harm can happen even when there's consent and there's reiterated consent and there's constant checking in and no agreements have been broken and and harm can still happen. And that's, I think, where it gets confusing and hard for people that have inadvertently caused harm to wrap their brain around well, how could that have happened? Because we were consenting all the way around and we had these agreements and you knew what was going on, but it's like, okay, can we just yes, all of that is true. And I'm feeling harm now, and this is how, and this is why. And can you just hear that and be with that? And can we all just breathe into that? And then, oh, okay, multiple truths.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it goes back to this, like if I cause you harm, there's a whole background social cultural belief system behind I'm bad.
Yeah.
I've done something wrong and I'm gonna be punished.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have that as the background, we'd be much more willing to listen and be like, oh, I caused you harm. Okay, tell me about it. Like, I care about you. If we take away
Well,
the right, wrong, and punishment, what's left is human beings that care about each other. It's like, of
yeah.
course, I want to know how I hurt you. Of
Yeah.
course, I want to make that right. But we've got all this like, you're on the stand, you're on trial, you're a criminal, you're going to go in the bad people house because you hurt someone. And like, what if we
Yeah.
learned that just normal navigating relationships includes people getting hurt, and we want to learn how to understand hurt and minimize hurt and repair hurt after it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. It is, and it's so worth repeating that part, why we shy away from it so much is that just inherent fear of being shamed or being made wrong and being judged as a bad person. And it's like, oh, my body, we just retract from that. And it's like, oh, if that wasn't there, yeah, we could just show up in love and compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I
what,
think that's a great awareness for us to be holding and from whatever perspective we're in is to recognize that that's there.
yeah. I would like when we think about what leaders do we look up to, I would wager that you and I and a lot of our listeners look up to leaders who are readily willing to admit when they're wrong. Leaders that in their leadership position will say, okay, I thought that was a good choice at the time. I see now that it wasn't. Like, look what happened because I see the impact was not what I intended. And I'm willing to take accountability for that. I'm willing to say, hey, look, that probably wasn't the best choice in hindsight. And I can self-analyze, like self-reflect. Okay, well, I made that choice because, I had a fear of this operating in the background. There's a lot of pressure for leaders. And that's
Yeah.
something, that we could really bring some mindfulness and love to. There's a
Mhm.
lot of pressure and expectations and responsibility.
Yeah.
And so, what if being a good leader included saying where we messed up and actually being a role model of what it looks like to listen humbly when we are made aware that we did something that hurt someone?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. All right. So I'm curious, before, there any harm happens, how can we be a better leader so that we're not causing harm, right? Because even though it's yes, it's okay, harm's going to happen, and we were accepting and normalizing that. And we also want to not be inadvertently causing harm.
Yeah. So we have some really good sort of tips for leaders if you're in leadership roles and you want to do your best to minimize possibilities of causing harm and going through accountability processes. These are some really good things to integrate into your life as a person and as a professional, both, obviously. And I'll just say super quick recap. So things we talked about already is having good communication skills, having done healing work on your own trauma, having nervous system regulation tools, and listening non-defensively. I would say those are like the ones we've covered so far.
Yep.
So listening non-defensively, I'm going to take that a step further. It falls into the realm of receiving feedback. So as leaders, we need to be able to receive feedback in a way that's non-defensive and not gaslighting the people giving us the feedback. And the extra piece I want to add now is that not only do we want to have the skills to be able to listen to feedback non-defensively, we want to proactively seek feedback. And
Mm.
that's another skill set. That's up leveling being able to receive feedback is proactively seeking feedback. And this is where power dynamics come into a lot. And I'll just briefly touch on that, not go deep into it. But briefly, when we're in power roles, what happens is our voices become what's true in a way. Our voices become the status quo. Our voices become the norm in the classroom or in the teaching space. And there's an inherent role power difference with the students or the participants in the workshop. And there is actually a difference in which voice holds more power. So when people are in these role power positions a lot, you know, the CEO of the company, the head of the police department, the head of the fire department, the lawyer, the mediator, the school teacher, right? Over and over and over again, we're socialized that our voice is true or accurate or powerful or how things are going to be done. You can even go to a mom in a family, you know, or a dad in the
Mm-hmm.
family, a parent, right? Like what they
Mm-hmm.
say is what goes, and that's part of power differentials. So, how this relates to proactively seeking feedback is that when people in power, role power like us, are accustomed to really having the say, we're questioned less and less. There's fascinating neuroscience on this, and anybody who's interested, I highly recommend you look into the neurobiology of power, because when we are in role power over and over and over again, what happens is we literally lose mirror neuron capability. This is shown in brain studies. Mirror
Wow.
neurons are the part of us that, like, when you smile and you're joyful, it makes me smile and it makes me feel happy. Or when you're distraught and crying and in grief, I feel that in my heart. I feel sad. That's how mirror neurons work. So mirror neurons are like a cornerstone for empathy. If I am the chief captain and what I say goes all the time, and few people question me and few people disagree with me, I lose the ability to mirror neuron people, which means I lose the ability to be empathetic with them.
Wow.
Literally.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. So when we have teachers that have had a ton of role power and then add to that things like status, you know, they've been a male, a financially successful, a white person, you know, when we add on top of all these other layers of power and privilege, it
Mm-hmm.
exacerbates what I'm talking about even further,
Yeah.
where they're actually biologically less able to access empathy. And these studies show that they basically become more egocentric.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because their opinion and their voice is what dictates the environment so frequently that their awareness, their sphere of awareness becomes more and more centered around themselves, and they literally become unable to understand and validate another person's perspective. Now, if I didn't know that neurobiology, I would just be angry, frankly, at the people I'm working with to take accountability because I wouldn't have empathy for them. the
Yeah.
the the rich white man who's been a CEO and in power forever, and he can't get that down power person's perspective. well, now I actually understand that there's neurobiology behind that. So it's like a whole nother nuanced layer of how I can have empathy to support this person to honestly start to change their neurobiology to come back to a more human place where they're accessing these parts of their brain that are doing mirror neuron things and empathy things. And one of the ways that we can do that is by intentionally putting ourselves in positions where we're down power, intentionally putting ourselves in positions where there are people whose opinions will differ from us and they
Mm-hmm.
will contrast what we say. Like those muscles are just weak. So we need to put ourselves in environments where we're going to be questioned, we're going to be disagreed with, we're going to be looking up at a person in power. An ISTA example is I was talking to a lead facilitator the other day who said, they went into a training and acted as an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So that is potentially confronting and potentially challenging, and I recommend it. I recommend people
Yeah.
in the higher leadership positions actually go to a training and take a role in a lower leadership position to remember what it's like to honestly take orders from someone and have your voice not be as powerful. It's like, it's shocking, right? And these things are happening in every room all the time, in every group.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. I'd heard that before, but having you elaborate on it as much as you did was I'm just like, wow, yeah, it's like kind
Yeah.
of intense to recognize that truth. But I'm really happy to hear that you offered a way of preventing that from being so intense is to put yourself in positions of down power. And it's coming to me, I'm like, oh, there's so many opportunities for that, which is like just stepping out of your, like, I would say, like getting out of my professional scope and like just learning different hobbies where I'm going and taking a class for something that's got nothing to do with what I've been studying for 20 years,
Yeah.
it can be that simple, I imagine, right? It's
It
like, oh,
can
just
be.
like keep exploring outside of your expertise and humble yourself as remembering what it's like to be a student and a novice in something. Imagine that would be really supportive in keeping
Yeah.
those mirror neurons activated.
Yeah, that's a great example. It is that simple. Like you go to knitting classes and you're sitting in front of these master knitters, like, whoa, I don't know any of those stitches, please teach me, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it's so easy to do that. So that's a way that we can remind ourselves that we don't know everything and our voice isn't God. Which I'll
Cool.
just I'll just make that connection. Comes back to proactively seeking feedback, which is another tip that we'll offer people in power. And proactively seeking feedback is one of those ways that we are mindfully acknowledging that power dynamics in a room tend to make our voice, God goddess, like I was saying, and the other down power person's voice less valuable, less accurate, less meaningful. And so this is related to feedback because their voices aren't necessarily going to come forward if we just have a survey that we give that we say, hey, we want your feedback, here's the survey, or we just have like a feedback form on our website, give us feedback. It's like that's the beginning, but that's not really enough. Proactively seeking feedback might be sitting down with someone one on one, sitting down, me as the facilitator, sitting down with someone who was in my workshop who I know had some challenges with me or with someone else in the room or with the material, and actually giving them like time and space to listen, to say, hey, I'm really interested in hearing what your experience was of that interaction. Like it looked like that was challenging, do you care to share more? That
Hmm.
would be one way. And frankly, some people won't want to talk to me because I'm the facilitator, I'm the teacher. There's inherently, some scariness in that for them bringing their voice. So another way of proactively seeking feedback is I would, if I had an assistant, I would say, hey, can you go to this person and sit with them and ask them how they're doing and offer some allyship and offer some support. That's one level less power than me because it's an assistant rather than the lead facilitator in the room, but that also might not work because the assistant still holds power and the
Hmm.
participant might still be uncomfortable sharing with an assistant. And these are the things that most leaders aren't aware of. So how can we proactively seek feedback that is as creating as safe an environment as possible? And it definitely goes back to our persona in the room. Are we listening to people and validating their experience and offering empathy, or are we like steamrolling through our curriculum and staying on agenda and not really letting ourselves be budged off of the things we want to do the way we want to do them? All that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact.
Yeah. All right. So proactively seeking feedback and being able to receive feedback non-defensively. And awareness. I mean, we've spoke a lot about the awareness of power dynamics. Do you want to say anything more about that in terms of minimizing minimizing harm happening or the need for having an accountability process?
Yeah, I don't think we need to go into that more. We have addressed power dynamics a lot. You'll probably
Yeah.
continue to hear it through the conversation. They're everywhere. I guess it's worth saying they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Every relationship at all times, in all instances, any relationship you can think of, there are power dynamics at play. And a lot of it is in blind spot. It's a lot of it's out of our sight, out of our awareness. So I guess the tip, just to sort of condense it into a tip, is for people in leadership positions to educate themselves on power dynamics and power differentials and take courses, learn about how power affects rooms, and that will really shift
Yeah.
how we lead spaces.
Yeah, and it's so nuanced. Like the more I've been studying it, and you mentioned the right use of power, I've been reading that book, and um, it's so nuanced. And I think, uh, like I mean, I was never really exposed to understanding that until the recent years, as I've, become an organizer, facilitator, teacher. Like the more I step into these leadership type of roles throughout my life, it's like, oh, you really like I've become more and more aware of the subtle nuances of where power is playing out just everywhere. Like you mentioned, it's just everywhere. And I think there's a lot of education that can, like the more we educate ourselves around that, the more sensitive and aware we become of it. And yeah, I think it is so important as leaders to have that knowledge, that awareness.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, what else you got for us? What are some other
Yeah.
tips?
So trauma informedness, what we talked about that a little bit as far as healing our own trauma, which is super important and super relevant to be a clear space to listen to others without our trauma getting in the way. But I'll add to that, I believe that it's an ethical duty as a facilitator to become more and more trauma informed. And I see that as a spectrum. I don't think it's like, check the box, I took a training, so I'm now trauma informed, and I wasn't trauma informed before I took the training. I think every training we take and every book we read and every podcast episode we listen to on trauma, we become more and more trauma informed. So that to me is an ongoing effort that all of us can be undertaking as facilitators and as leaders, specifically facilitators and leaders in spaces where people are actively working on their trauma and healing their trauma,
Yeah.
like particularly those environments. So yeah, take courses, eat up material, learn about how trauma works, and that helps us to understand how trauma is working in others as well as how trauma is working in ourselves. And both are equally important and relevant when we're in leadership roles. And let me just speak now as a person who's supporting managing accountability processes for ISTA and other clients as well. This is not just ISTA. There are so many companies and leaders that are going through different forms of accountability processes. I think it's trending now, which is a really cool thing and a really great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are professionals out there like me who specialize and help with supporting the company or the professional to go through an accountability process. And so becoming trauma informed is crucial for every single one of these accountability processes because of both sides, because the leader has their own trauma impacting relationships. Even if we've done a ton of trauma healing work on ourselves, those things do still come out. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like we're done with all of our triggers because we've done work on ourselves. I think that the way our evolution works as a human is that we constantly are being offered situations by the universe that will tempt us, trigger us, grow us. So even if we've done a lot of our own trauma healing work, I believe that we are still going to face situations where we are going to be reactive rather than responding, where we're going to be triggered and have to use our nervous system regulation tools, right? Because that's, to me, an ongoing process. That's our evolution.
Yeah.
So, so as leaders working with people who come from higher trauma backgrounds, which are often the people drawn to these transformational environments. It's really a kind of a perfect storm. We've got people with a lot of trauma in their background coming into environments where they're particularly vulnerable, working in, spirituality and sexuality, just to name the field of ISTA. That is such a vulnerable environment. So leaders want to be so deeply educated in how trauma moves, both in ourselves and in the people that are in our workshops, so that we can handle things delicately. Like
Yeah.
trauma requires delicateness. It doesn't require brute strength and a two by four. Working with trauma requires awareness, attunement, sensitivity, ability to sit in discomfort, ability to discern nuances. There's
Hmm.
just such a skill set there in working with trauma. And I think this is another major, 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 major crucial one for leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. And it is such a hot topic right now. So there are so many resources available for becoming more trauma informed. Yeah. All right. What else? Got more tips for us?
Sure. Recap on the impact and intent. The part I didn't say yet about that is that, and this is maybe radical and hard, I think, for some leaders to take on, and I recommend it for leaders, taking on that the impact we cause is more important than the intention we had. So I think most
Hmm.
conversations in accountability and restorative justice are saying, we got to look at both intent and impact. And that's totally true. To up level that even more, I would say our impact is more important than our intention. And that might turn people inside out a little bit. Um, to me, my intention matters inside of me more than it matters outside of me. So my intention matters more in my sphere, but someone I've harmed really doesn't give a shit about what intention I had.
Right.
They don't,
Right.
because that's the
Yeah.
state of a harmed person. They care about their experience.
Yeah.
They don't really care about what the person meant to do.
Yeah.
Whereas my impact is everything else outside of me.
Yeah.
And if I'm a person who walks around not caring about the impact I make, I am literally in disconnection with my environment. I am completely not attuned to my environment. I'm in some ego sphere where, what matters is what's mattering inside of me. And I think a lot of people walk around like that. And I don't think that's the kind of leaders we want to be. I think we want to
Yeah.
be the kind of leaders that value our impact out there more than our intention inside of us.
Hmm.
Because, and I learned that actually a long time ago with communication. I can link this to communication. Before I even got into accountability work, I was doing courses with companies like Landmark Worldwide. I did all of their communication courses. And through that work, I really understood what I say, it matters more how it lands out there for you
Right.
than what I'm trying to say, which is actually that intent and impact piece.
Yeah.
But in the realm of communication, it's like I want to talk, I want to communicate in a way that lands for you based on your experience and your listening and the lenses you're looking through. Because if I'm not able to have my communication land with you, I am ineffective in that
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with being a leader and with accountability. Just really getting the impact we have on people is the most important thing because Now we're in the world of relating to others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super helpful the way you explained that. I really love that explanation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So another one that we talked about some, and I'll just bring it down to the main point, is owning our mistakes, is being willing to be wrong, being comfortable in the realm of I messed up, I hurt someone, right? So owning our mistakes is really a muscle that most of us haven't built. I think for me personally, I'm still in the place of, I get scared to mess up.
Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah.
deep, like it's so collective and it's so deep. And I think I am good though, mostly at when I mess up, just okay, like taking the humble pill and saying, okay, like
Yeah.
I messed up, let's look at repair and let's look at what we need to do to right this.
Yeah.
So owning our mistakes humbly is definitely a muscle. And the part I want to say that I haven't said yet is that this is really relevant for building trust. And we haven't talked about trust yet, but trust is another one of those things that's operating at all times in all environments, like power is. And, trust is a really big topic when it comes to harm and the vulnerabilities of being down power. A person who has those vulnerabilities inherent in being down power, they want to be able to trust leaders, and most leaders, I think, in our society are not really trustworthy. Or, I'm not saying now in the transformational space, I'm saying like in the
Political realm.
yeah, political realm. Yeah. So most of the leaders out there in the world probably aren't that trustworthy, and people know that. So I think the collective is to not trust leaders. So as leaders, we're dealing with that bias against us. There's
Mm,
probably a default that people don't trust us, partly because we're in leadership roles, believe it or not.
hmm.
So owning our mistakes is a really effective way to build trust with people.
Yeah.
Like, and we know this, like those of us who've been taught this, we've been taught, be vulnerable in the classroom. Like, tell a story where you're actually in a state of vulnerability, sharing something vulnerable. And partly why that's effective is because it helps build trust. So that's a useful
That's
tool.
awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that piece in, particularly about the trust building. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I was counting. That was like 5 really valuable tips on minimizing harm or the need for accountability. Do you have any more tips you want to share with us?
Yeah, I have one more, and depending on time, I have several more. But if there's only time for one more, I'm picking one that is often overlooked by teachers and facilitators and high execs, which is the importance of having, we can say it in different ways, but I'll say a work-life balance. The importance of having self-care, the importance of having rest and rejuvenation. And I'm speaking to the leaders. So
Yeah.
part of what's happening is people are burnt out. People are working, frankly, too hard, doing trainings back to back with 3 days in between, moving from one country to another, jet lag. And not only are they doing these two trainings back to back, but they're also managing, their private clients and their emails and the podcast episode that they need to edit and produce. It's like we have, frankly, overlapping responsibilities because of all these different things on our plate. And yeah, add to that, you're a parent and your kid's sick, and you've got issues with your kid at school, and the whole world of being a parent, tons and tons and tons of responsibilities there. So we're frankly overworked and not balancing well. A lot of people, a lot of leaders are not balancing what they need to do self-care, to rest, and to restore. I'm naming this because it is in almost every conflict situation I see that makes its way to a mediation process or to an accountability process. Often what's happening is the leader is essentially under resourced. They're not doing enough self-care, they're not resting enough, so they're not showing up to the container where they're teaching with a lot of patience and with a lot of access to empathy. So this sounds simple, and that's kind of why I'm naming it, is that it's actually a really pervasive issue that we're seeing in a lot of these situations where, again, it goes back to that original incident, whatever like situation caused harm, because the leader is overworked, under-resourced, they don't actually show up with tenderness and with care and with listening. They show up rushing, pushing, not patient, and that exacerbates the harm caused exponentially.
Mm.
So, one of my pieces of advice for people is work less, rest more, take vacation between your trainings, and actually show up resourced, because you're dealing with highly sensitive environments that requires your all. It requires your ability to be attuned to the traumatized person in the room. And if you're under resourced, you don't have the patience, you don't care. Truly.
Hmm.
We've all done it. We've all done it. We've all seen our colleagues do it, just not showing up tenderly when someone's hurt and needing support.
Hmm. Yeah, and as you're sharing all of that, I'm looking at how relevant and applicable that is to anybody in any relationship. It's like speaking about the working mom or the busy housemaid or something. It's like, oh, in every relationship in our life, if we're not resourced and if we don't know how to regulate our nervous system and take responsibility for like our internal environment and our mental emotional capacity, it can cause more conflict, more tension, more drama. And can we really say like, hey, especially, like in our day-to-day relationships, like, oh, I'm really feeling under resourced, but I want to have this conversation. It's important to me. Can we have it this evening, or can we bookmark it for tomorrow morning, so that I'm taking responsibility for getting resource, regulating myself so that I can show up responsibly, compassionately, empathically to have those potentially challenging conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you for bringing it to outside of the leadership conversation, really everywhere. It's true.
Yeah.
If we're not doing self care in an effective way and we're not well resourced, we're going to show up pretty crappily when there's conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard to, again, like receive any kind of feedback if we're under resourced and we're exhausted and we're stressed out. It's like, oh, we really need to be resourced and regulated to have challenging conversations, to do repair work, to be receptive, to listen, to own our mistakes, all of it.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
don't think most of us yet have integrated that lesson of we need to be resourced and doing good self-care as like a duty to our students, as a duty to
Mm,
those down power to us, as part of our responsibility to those down power to us. I don't think most of us see it at that level yet. I think if anything, those of us who are doing good self-care are doing it for ourselves, which is beautiful and important. So I'm not
right.
knocking that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in addition to doing good self care for ourselves as acts of self love, it's also part of our duty to those we're in relationship with, particularly when we're a power and holding the space in a super vulnerable space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this reframe that my self-care is not only for me, it's an act of service for others so that I can show up better in relationships.
Exactly. That's it. Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow, we did it. I before we started this interview, I was thinking about how I'm like, oh, Kamela, we could just talk for hours on this conversation. We're going to have to really hone it in. And I think we did a really good job of staying on task here. And we'll, the ISTA podcast will have more podcasts on this subject. That we've had one on trauma. We'll have another one probably on power pretty soon. So for our listeners, like, we get that this is nuance and there's so much more to explore here. So yeah, I love this. I think this was such valuable content, and it's super fun talking about it with you and making it accessible for everyone. And thank you for all of your knowledge and experience and energy poured into this particular scope of practice.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for nerding out with me on these topics. I
Oh,
get that
yeah.
not only are you, holding this as the host of the podcast, but you personally are invested in these topics and you're really taking it on. Like, how do I become a more aware leader and a more attuned leader? And how do I understand power differentials as a leader and account for all
Yeah.
these things? So I honor and respect that
Mm.
you are personally invested in this. And thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah. Thank you.